So what you're looking at here is essentially where the majority of your code is going to happen. The idea of coding in Stencylworks is that you kind of have your cause and effect. So you create an event, which is kind of something that initiates like an event. So, for example, things like when the level begins, when a button is pushed, when something bumps into something else. That's like the trigger, or like the question that's being asked. And then over here is some of the responses that you can kind of have happen in response to what you've triggered. One of the quite nice things about Stencylworks is that you can compiler errors are kind of few and far between. In that, in standard code, you would have to write out everything by hand. Well, in actual text-based code. There isn't any in here, but say that I missed a letter or something like that, or a semicolon, or it removes that issue from the scheme of things. So it allows you to iterate things rather quickly. So let's get started with getting our character moving. So let's add an event. Now, let me run you through the three main ones that you're going to probably use quite a bit. So creating is when the game begins, you want something to happen. So for example, setting a score to 0, setting the character's position back to a certain point, or for example, when an object in-game is created, how you want that to behave. So then there's when drawing, which is when you want to have kind of statistics, or if you want to have text on the screen, or objects and shapes. So for things like life bars, that's quite useful. And then you've got when updating. So this is when you're wanting to kind of keep track of things happening. So for example, if you're wanting to check every millisecond, constantly check to see if something's gone over a certain score, or if you want something to constantly keep happening. A good comparison between when creating something and when updating something is, let me think of how to explain it. Let's say you're on a walk with a friend and you're wanting to kind of, these are two different trips that you go on. On one trip you have a map or a GPS or something like that, which means that you can constantly keep track of where you're going. Whilst, for example, if you've not got those, you have to kind of only get information on a less regular basis. So you, for example, might bump into someone who, kind of directs you in a certain way, and the amount of information that you would get from something like, for example, when created, or when you're creating something at only every couple of seconds, is different from when you're constantly checking for something happening. So for this, we're going to start with when updating, which is going to be when we're going to be rotating our character. So you can see from this is kind of like a chunk of Lego or a jigsaw piece. Only something that matches the shape of this can connect to it. So for example, this piece of code here, you can see will connect because the edges match. There is this flat bit on the bottom. As long as the top bit matches, it's fine. So if I connect this into place, you'll see that there's like a degree of snapping to it, which is quite useful. And you can see there's an indicator to say where it's going to fit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, for starters, before we make it that we can actually trigger pushing a button, what I'm going to do is just get the character to spin or move. So I'm going to set the turning speed of my spaceship Now you can see it referring to self. The reason it's referring to self is because we're within the spaceship right now. So let's set this to 150. So it'll rotate constantly, rather than just when the game begins. So if I come up to here now, I can test the game. So we're just going to test it in Flash for now. There is actually a bunch of different options for testing. Some are restricted to Pro features, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that. But if I click Test Game, it'll take kind of like a second or two to compile. You can see how that's going in the log viewer. So that says writing the game out now. And when it's done that, you should be able to see a spaceship kind of rapidly spinning around in a circle. Now, what we'll want to do after that point is we'll want it to. There we go. So if I maximize this to show what's happening, so that's rotating. Now you can see actually that there's a little bit of blurriness around the spaceship itself. That is something that we need to alter in settings. We just need to turn off anti-aliasing in Stencil. But yeah, you can see that this object is now rotating, and that's great. So let's just quickly go to settings, and I believe it will be under advanced, and turn off anti-aliasing. Click OK. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create what is known as an if function. Now the if function is going to be like a question that's asked, and unless this question is true, it's not going to run this section of code. So that'll be under flow, and it's going to be this here, which is a condition, like a yes and no kind of answer. Now for this piece of code if you want your if function to have a piece of code be affected by it, it has to be within like the bounds of it. If it's here and you set like a question that has to be true, it'll still run it because it'll bypass this part and just go straight for the order that it's been given. So let's put that in there. Now you can see this is kind of a funny shape, and that's because it's only going to affect. It's only going to allow a certain shape to be connected to it. You can actually see there's an arrow here. If you click on the drop down, you have all of the kind of the different kind of Boolean statements available for this. So we're going to be going to user input, and that's going to be if a certain button is pushed. So that's going to be keyboard function. So if a certain control is down, we're going to set the turning speed. So if, let's say, right is down, it gets very complicated when you're dealing with up and down, because then you get things like when down is down or when up is down, which gets confusing. But you have three options in total. You've got when a key is down, when a key is pressed, and when a key is released. When a key is down, it's when it's been sustained and held down, so it'll keep sending the command through. If you want something when it's pressed, for example, something like a if you want something like a shooting mechanism, you can make it that when you're pushing the key down, when you're pushing the space bar down, it'll fire one bullet every time you push it. If you had it when it was held down, it would just create a ridiculous stream of bullets and probably crash your computer. So yeah, like we'd probably want to, for this we want to set it to when right is held down, so it'll keep the ship turning as long as you're pushing the button. So if we test this now, it should now work. This is kind of one thing that's quite nice about the software is that you can do this stuff very quickly and kind of get feedback from visual and gameplay feedback pretty quickly. So then what we'll do after this is we'll get left set up and then maybe do forwards as well. So if I push right, the ship rotates.